Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 26. We're recording it on Sunday, November 29th at 1:19 p.m. And like always, we're just going to talk about God. We're going to it's difficult. It's difficult to keep it, to keep a conversation focused on God. But on the other hand, there's so much to talk about relative to God. So I always like to begin. I just like to begin with just like God being everything, that everything is God. We're a part of God, that God is everywhere. There's no place that God is not, which is very, very cool. Okay, Josh, how you doing?
Oh, doing great, George. I'm here in Florida on the beach, so I can't complain. And it's kind of fun to change places and kind of take that perspective of God being everything, and being stuck in one place for so long, which a lot of us are suffering from right now. We kind of get a confined idea of God because we haven't exposed our consciousness to new scenery or whatever. And I think that starting with defining God as everything to remind us that there's much more to everything than we usually have in our little bubble, our little awareness, our little filter bubble. And so if we're struggling with whatever it is, maybe at least go for a walk outside and see some other parts of God.
Yeah, I mean, I did, I mentioned to you that my brother, died recently. And so I was kind of like, I talk to God all the time and I was asking God, so where is he? Because I really, it's not really belief. It's more, I guess, of an understanding based on the logic we've been describing over these last, 25 episodes. And so, I mentioned this to you earlier that I came to this, a stronger awareness that like when we die, because God is everything and God is everywhere, and our consciousness is really God, and also because God never forgets anything, and God is omniscient. So God knew, for example, a gazillion years ago, what we'd be doing in every moment of our life, that my brother and we all continue to exist within God, I think in just as real a form, if you want to think about it, as we exist in this reality, which is a very cool and comforting thought.
Yeah. Losing your brother, I'm sorry to hear that. And I think that's such an important experience. A lot of other cultures, handle death and they celebrate death very different than we do here in the West. And I think there's something to it that's more than meets the eye. There's a lot of anthropologists and um, sociologists and stuff have studied this, and they've realized that how we view life and how we live life relates a lot to how our culture views death. And so now there's actually amazing movements for us to have different dialogues about death. Maybe we could spend some of the show doing that if you want. But there's people can find them online. There's some TED Talks about it, and there's actually local meetups and stuff that are just about this very topic, and looking at all the different ways that other cultures, understand the afterlife and death and the point of life relative to death. Um, and so, yeah, it really opened up my eyes to the way it's kind of intertwined. It really is.
Yeah, it's like on Zoom or on Meetup, they have like these death cafes where they talk about death. And yes, like I was talking to one of my brothers, he's kind of religious, not all that, religious. I mean, he doesn't have like a very as strong a concept of God as I do. And I think, yes, I think it's very important. I think that, religious people who believe in God have a very, very strong support and advantage in times like this, because we have this foundation, you know to make sense of things like this. And so like absolutely, I think like, talking about death is key, is an integral part of talking about God.
Yeah, it does seem kind of weird that a lot of religion seems to have been created to kind of relieve death anxiety, but along with that, a lot of it, you know, kind of swept it under the rug, right? And I still think about this a lot, um, because this afterlife, who are we, what are we, where did we come from, what was the creator, and then what happens after we die, or you know, and then the short time in between, uh, this perspective, of how do we spend our life so that it's meaningful, and for me, a lot of movies, you get there's some emotion. I can think about it logically all I want and rationally, but if I can't tap into that emotion of meaningfulness, which I've experienced in a lot of movies, that deal with death or end of life, right? And then it's like this rush of, oh, we have a very short life here, finite, and at some point I'm going to have to evaluate my life, or I'm going to try to look back and see the meaning of it, the purpose of it, and I think that's part of it, and should be part of what gets summoned anytime anyone we love passes as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I have a somewhat different take on, yes, believing, understanding that God must exist, is I think imbues life with so much more meaning than, for example, to be an atheist, to just think we're just like, molecules and in cells and stuff like that. But the other thing is like, defining God as we have over this series and understanding that we are part of God's consciousness, we're parts of God's reality. For me personally, it kind of like takes a bit of the pressure off to do so much with this life. In other words, like, yeah, we have maybe 80, 90, 100 years, whatever here, but that's just not the end. And our life here wasn't the beginning. So, I just find that a comfort that that if we don't, do everything, we want to, that's fine because we have an eternity ahead of us.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe part of that life being short is not just trying to accomplish a lot, but happiness, and seeking out, happiness and enjoyment, and making the most of life that way, instead of kind of the trap I end up falling in, of especially as a workaholic, is kind of putting off fun, or putting off even the self-actualization parts of fun, finding out what I'm good at and what I love, and what are the autotelic activities, the things that my body just naturally loves to do, not for getting paid, or not for any other means or obligation or anything like that. So I guess there's probably a couple ways to take that, I guess.
All right, so I want to go back to this idea that we exist, because it's a cool, and you don't hear people talking about this. You don't hear clerics talk about this, or, that we basically, everything, including we human beings, exist within God's memory, within God's consciousness. So yeah, again, like one very cool thing is like we've always existed, go back a gazillion years before God created this world. Presumably we existed in God's consciousness, everything. And so like, again, that's another way of understanding how, by that understanding of God, we arrive at the understanding that we are as eternal as God. It's a very, very surreal, very cool thought.
Yeah. What is consciousness, and how does it exist, and how does that relate to God being everything, and the creator of everything, and all knowing and all present? I guess we don't have all the answers, but there definitely does seem to be a sentiment, like what you just said, that allows us to, um, reflect on death and the afterlife and life in a much more timeless sense of oneness and unity. And I think this is probably you know, probably accurate, and not just accurate, but uh, pretty much on target with what people are trying to describe when they have profound mystical experiences and profound moving spiritual experiences that, sometimes seem really ineffable, maybe just because the clerics and the traditional religions haven't talked about God in such an expansive way and talked about us being a part of God, and that, the non-duality, um, that these mystical experiences speak to, um, doesn't just mean that we're all one and we're one with the environment and all of the stimuli that's affecting our causality, this illusion of free will, but also that the non-duality, that we're one with God.
Yeah, I think that's supremely important because and even again within the conventional religions today, they don't talk about that much, that unity, which is like curious because like one of our main problems as human beings on this planet is that we do feel separate from everyone. We do feel like that we're individuals competing often and just like, involved in conflict. So yes, so like, this process that we're going through, that we're describing in this series of explaining how, there is only one being and that being is God and we're all part of this one being. I think that's really important, not just, theoretically, not just to understand God's nature more, but to understand, to appreciate how that understanding can really help us, in our day-to-day life and interacting with ourselves, with everything in our world and everybody else in our world.
Yeah, I mean, times are really changing, and again, I always try to emphasize or remind myself, rather, what served the generations of past, and for centuries and centuries ago, you know, if it's different now or we view it different, doesn't mean that was wrong. It doesn't mean, it didn't have its place, especially, uh, usually to allow our evolution, our consciousness to evolve, this evolution of consciousness to get to the point where now we can see it and relate to it in the way that we do, and I mean, uh, the oneness and the unity message didn't have such an impact for whatever reason, and one thing I, suspect is that it's harder to kind of tell people what they should think about God and how they should think, if you're giving this message of unity and oneness, and you're one with God and God is you, kind of thing, which I think's always been true, but now we're just kind of rediscovering, I think, is what's really going on.
Yeah, and I think another advantage, benefit of our approach of focusing on God and understanding God is that, like, in our conventional religions today, in Judaism, Christianity, I imagine Islam, um, a lot of times these religions are not so much about God, but they're about the Israeli people or the early Christians or the Muslims and all. They're about people. And so, yeah, I think it's really important, you know, to even if, like, for example, on this series, we're going to be asking a lot of questions, because, we expect that as we ask these questions, our understanding of God as we do this series is going to strengthen and become more complete just by asking questions. We may not have the answers to every question we ask, but I think this process of focusing on God is really, really key and instrumental to this whole purpose of religion.
Yeah, I mean, most of the religions, actually probably all the religions, came out of a form of tribalism, which is also, a very valuable form of consciousness, that we mostly celebrate today, maybe with sports, or, kind of, we know it's not really, we know a football game isn't real warfare, but we have this long lineage of being, tribal beings, that may have been in scarce environments, competing with resources and trying to fend off enemy invaders, that kind of thing. And religion, and understanding God and celebrating God and having God as a unifying force, and kind of a unifying consciousness among the group of people, certainly serve some very important purposes. And I think we can still draw from that, whenever we're going through any type of crisis, or um, any type of trying to raise our collective awareness or collective consciousness. Um, and I think, and also to be so fortunate and blessed to not have to have a narrow view of God that makes us the best warriors, or because we now have this unprecedented abundance that's never been before in history, and unprecedented level of peace. And many people around the world still don't have that luxury. um, and I hope that we can work as the more fortunate ones to you know uh, help them, bring them out of poverty, and help them with their matters of diplomacy and peace, and that kind of thing, um, and not take it for granted in the meantime.
Yeah, another point I think that, that we're talking about is that, there are five major religions in the world. And Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then Buddhism, isn't, it may not technically be a religion, because a religion may require a divinity, and Buddhism is kind of like more philosophy. But, almost the entire world is it belongs to one of these four religions that deal with God. Hinduism deals with God in the sense of the Brahman. And so, like, I think that sometimes there's not enough unity among these religions, because I think a lot of times they focus on, the Jewish people, the Christian people, the Muslim people, rather than on God. And I think that, if we shift our focus from the history and what certain people said a long time ago to an exploration of God, I think that among those four monotheistic religions, and I think we can even probably persuade Buddhists to understand logically, because they appreciate logic a lot, that God must exist, and just basically unite these world religions with this common, rational, not prophetic understanding of God.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's um, you know really important, I think, in this kind of unification and appreciation, and integration, is that different types of minds have evolved around the world. We kind of appreciate, the fact that here in our own town we have different types of people. We got artists, and we got, you know, thinkers and engineers, and law enforcement and government, and they all kind of, whatever type of mind you have, you tend to gravitate toward that. But even more so profoundly, I think it's underappreciated. The Eastern mind is profoundly different than the Western mind, and great, thinkers and psychologists like Carl Jung realized this and appreciated it. And you know, I, um, so I think it's really almost a spiritual discipline or obligation to kind of understand that, just like we would an artist, or just like we would, go to see a really great movie and realize that the creative brilliance and minds behind it, we may not have that, but that can speak to the true nature of God in all capacities, um, and the true potentials for the mind, right? And I think that's just as important for these issues that we take more seriously when it comes to either morality or politics or whatever, or differences between cultures, is to realize that the consciousness I have may not be the consciousness an artist have, and that may not be the consciousness that an Arab has or an Eastern mind. But I should appreciate and respect and try to get as much from how their consciousness manifests and their understanding as I can, just through watching them, studying them, and having appreciation for them.
That's a great point. And again, I just wanted to reiterate, like, doing this series is like we come to better understand our knowledge of God. And, like, for example, when you were talking, the thought came to me that because we understand that God is the only being, when we strive to understand God more clearly, more accurately, more completely, what we're really doing also is succeeding at understanding ourselves as human beings much, much better. And again, like, to the extent the conventional understanding of us, relative to God, especially, that exists today, is deeply flawed, is deeply mistaken. It's not like we're here and then God is out there someplace. I think it's very important for us all to realize really, really strongly and appreciate that there is only God, and we're part of this only being that spans out, 2 trillion galaxies. That it is like, I think it really ennobles us, in addition to helps us kind of like better understand. And again, you're right, it unifies us when we're kind of like part of this one God. We see ourselves in relation to other people in a completely different and much, much better, much, much, much more communal and cooperative manner.
Yeah, so that's interesting. What came to mind is you talked about the Buddhists, and there's many different, forms of Buddhism, just like there is the other religions, and some of them tend to be more theistic than others. But um, by and large, compared to the other religions, they're much less theistic. Um, and but interesting though is that Buddhism came out of Hinduism, which is very polytheistic, right? And so you got polytheism, and then you got monotheism, and then you got Buddhism that came out of polytheism, but it tends to not be theistic at all, but probably more monotheistic, if anything. Um, so uh, then we have the Western traditions that have what you were saying is kind of a view of God that's very boxed in and not uh, not accurate in the sense of, even the way that some of their own scriptures speak about God, right, as being everything and all present and all knowing. And um, so it's, again, I try to remind myself, well, I'm not in the form of consciousness that, somebody who has a really conservative fundamentalist view of God is having, and I'm not, wasn't raised Buddhist and wasn't raised Hindu, so I can't. I try not to judge, because who am I to really know? Maybe they're more accurate than me. I don't know, but I think from that, just an awe and a respect for um, I don't know. I guess the diversity. So there we talked about the Buddhists are almost atheists and agnostic in some sense, because to the extent they're not theists, right? But then I kind of feel I agree with you that the Western traditions kind of have too narrow a view of God, and so it's like, where's the Goldilocks zone, right? Where's the just right for me, at least, um, and where do I find the most peace and meaningfulness with my life and my relationships?
Yeah, I think, Buddhism is, it reflects an advance in religion that I think our series and what we're trying to do is trying to reflect. In other words, I think before Buddhism, and basically, the religions were prophetic. In other words, like, somebody said something and everybody believed it because somebody said it. Now, one of the things the Buddha said was like, you know, don't believe what I say because I say it. Think about it. If it makes sense to you, then, hold it as your understanding. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're doing, not just about reality, but about God. So again, like, getting back to like, unifying, it could be that Buddhism, after however many millennia, over 2 millennia of really being non-theistic, they don't really deal with the concept of God in that religion, or at least, the traditional religion. They actually may be, they may be very receptive to this very rational, logical method that we don't have to rely on a prophet. We can just basically, if reality exists, it's got to have a creator. And the creator is what we call God. And if God created the universe, God has to be everything. So we could basically present this truth to Buddhists, making it a monotheistic religion also. But again, the advantage of Buddhism is it's always been about test it out, meditate on it, contemplate on it. Don't just believe what somebody said a long time ago. Test it out and see if it works.
Yeah, I guess I'm reminded how you started this episode out with, kind of it being a struggle to always be talking about God, even though that's what is happening, no matter what we're talking about, right? From our kind of more expansive understanding of God, right? And so, there's a struggle of, maybe it's just a feeling that, you know, I kind of wonder why does it seem so difficult or hard, right? If that's really what's going on anyways, and just to talk in a way that reassures us that we are talking about God and referencing God, right? Um, and then something about this Buddhist perspective, right, where they're almost, if they're a Buddhist might have the understanding that's actually kind of closer to this, even though they're not using the term God in the sense that we do, and that serves our lineage of Westerners. And then I'm kind of reminded of like all of the ways to talk about God that do more harm than good, almost all of the false notions of God. And so if we were talking about God in that way, well, maybe that we would want to talk less about God. And so much of our Western tradition history, unfortunately, comes from religions that talked about God that way. So maybe it's kind of in us naturally to be second guessing ourselves or doubting our ability as individuals, or somebody experiencing some unique form of God from what they were taught was the proper form of God, to actually be able to talk about God or appreciate that they are.
Yeah, and I think, just like with our science is not perfect, our humanity, our civilization is not perfect. We try to make it more perfect as we go along. So the more we can perfect our understanding of God, the more that, can help us all, in our lives. Because really, like, the understanding of God is really about enhancing our lives. It's about, basically living the blessings that God wants for us all. All right, so we've run out of time. Thanks for watching, and we will see you again here on our God series. Thanks again.